It was supposed to be just another routine mission. The human crew, under the command of Captain Trent, had been sent to the distant planet of Zorath IV for a diplomatic visit. They were there to meet with the leaders of an alien race, the Vasheri, known for their advanced technology and militaristic ways. The meeting was meant to establish trade routes and ensure peaceful relations between the Human Federation and the Vasheri Empire. But for one crew member, things were about to take an unexpected turn. Jackson, a young lieutenant, had always thought of himself as just a regular officer. He wasn't special. He wasn't the captain or even the chief diplomat. He was just a soldier sent to keep an eye on things and make sure nothing went wrong. The crew had no idea that their arrival on the Vasheri capital would lead them into a web of intrigue and danger. The meeting had started as planned, with introductions and formal discussions about trade and security. But things took a strange turn when an unexpected threat appeared. An assassin, one of the Vasheri's enemies, made an attempt on the life of the Vasheri queen during the ceremony. In the chaos, Jackson's instincts kicked in. Without thinking, he leaped forward, using his military training to disable the would-be attacker before anyone else could react. His quick actions saved the queen's life, but it wasn't just her life that he had saved. The Vasheri royal court was stunned. The queen, with her commanding presence and cold gaze, looked directly at Jackson, her eyes lingering for a moment longer than necessary. It was then that he realized something was different about this mission, something far beyond what he had signed up for. The queen, named Zarira, was no ordinary ruler. She was feared and respected across the galaxy for her ruthless tactics and strategic mind. Her people had always been known for their strict, emotionless ways. Yet, as she gazed at Jackson, he could see a flicker of something in her eyes. Curiosity. It was subtle, but it was there. In that instant, Jackson understood that his actions had made him more than just a soldier to her. He had caught her attention. Captain Trent, still recovering from the chaos, gave Jackson a sharp nod. But Jackson couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. The queen wasn't looking at him like she would any other member of the diplomatic team. There was something in her expression that made him feel different. As the ceremony continued, the human delegation was escorted to the royal palace, where they were to stay for the night. Jackson, however, couldn't stop thinking about the queen. He had saved her life, yes, but now something much more dangerous seemed to be growing between them. Something he hadn't asked for. That night, alone in his quarters, Jackson lay awake, staring out of the window at the unfamiliar sky. The stars felt closer than they had ever been before, and as he closed his eyes, he couldn't help but wonder how his life had changed so drastically in a single moment. He had never expected this. The days that followed the attempt on the queen's life were tense, but Jackson could feel a subtle shift in the air. The Vasheri palace, once cold and imposing, now seemed alive with whispers. The crew's mission was still officially about diplomacy, but behind the scenes, Jackson's actions had caused something much more complicated to stir. As the crew gathered in the grand dining hall one evening, Jackson noticed the queen's eyes on him again. Zarira's gaze was unwavering, studying him from across the room. He tried not to look directly at her, feeling a strange pull in his chest whenever their eyes met. It was as though she could see right through him, understanding things about him that he didn't even know himself. Jackson's curiosity about her grew with every passing day. Zarira was not like any leader he had ever met. She wasn't just cold and calculated. There was something more, something he couldn't quite place. Every time they spoke, she revealed more about herself, but it was always wrapped in layers of authority and mystery. She spoke of her empire, the struggles of ruling a vast and powerful civilization, and the weight of the decisions she had to make. Yet there was a sadness in her voice at times, a loneliness that Jackson hadn't expected. One evening, after a particularly long day of meetings, Jackson found himself walking alone through the palace gardens. The stars above were bright, casting a gentle glow over the lush greenery. As he passed a fountain, he heard a soft voice behind him. "You are far from home, Lieutenant." Jackson froze and turned around to find Zarira standing there, dressed in simple robes that seemed to soften her usual regal appearance. For a moment, she didn't seem like a queen, but just a woman, someone who had been burdened by the weight of leadership for far too long. "I was just thinking about that," Jackson replied, his voice quieter than usual. "I never thought I'd be here, on a planet like this, helping you, or saving you." He added the last part with a small chuckle, though it was far from humorous. Zarira studied him, her expression unreadable. Then, unexpectedly, she spoke again, her tone softer than he had ever heard it. "You are the first human to ever act without fear in my presence. Most would cower before me, but not you. Why is that?" Jackson hesitated. He had never thought about it before, but it was true. He had never been intimidated by her, not even when she stood as a powerful ruler commanding her people. Maybe it was the simple fact that he didn't view her as an untouchable monarch. He saw her as someone just like him, someone burdened with responsibilities beyond their control. "I don't know," he said honestly. "Maybe because you're not what I expected. You're not just a queen. You're more than that." The queen's eyes softened, a hint of something vulnerable flashing through her gaze. "More," she echoed, her voice barely a whisper. Jackson nodded. "Yes. You seem lonely. You've got the whole galaxy under your control, but no one truly understands you." There was a long pause. For the first time, Zarira seemed lost in thought, her guard momentarily down. Then, without saying another word, she turned and walked away, her long robes trailing behind her like a shadow in the moonlight. As Jackson stood there, watching her leave, he couldn't shake the feeling that this conversation had marked a turning point. He had said more than he should have, but something told him that Zarira had heard it, and perhaps, just perhaps, she was starting to see him in a way she hadn't before. The days that followed the conversation in the garden were filled with an air of tension and curiosity. Jackson couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed between him and the queen. Zarira, once a distant and powerful leader, had shown a side of herself he hadn't expected, vulnerable, almost fragile in the quiet moments. It was a side of her he couldn't ignore, and it only drew him closer to her. The next day, Jackson was summoned to the royal chambers. He wasn't sure what to expect. He had been in many meetings, but this felt different. When he entered, Zarira was standing by a large window, gazing out over the city. The distant lights of the palace shone like stars in the dark sky. "You wanted to see me, Your Majesty?" Jackson asked, trying to keep his tone professional. Zarira turned, her eyes meeting his with that same intensity he had grown used to. There was something unspoken between them, something she had yet to say. "Please, sit," she said, her voice calm but with a subtle hint of urgency. Jackson did as instructed, taking the seat across from her. She didn't speak right away, instead studying him, as though weighing something in her mind. Finally, she spoke, her voice low and thoughtful. "I have been thinking about what you said the other night," Zarira began, "about being lonely. You are the first to see that in me." Jackson didn't know how to respond. He had only spoken what he had felt in the moment, but now it seemed to matter more than he could have anticipated. He watched as Zarira moved to a nearby table, where a holographic map of the galaxy was displayed. She gestured for him to look, and Jackson's eyes followed her hand. "This," Zarira said, tapping a few points on the map, "is my empire. We control countless worlds, have immense power, and yet, it is all for nothing without the right people to share it with. I have no one to trust, not even my closest advisors." Jackson leaned forward, sensing the weight in her words. "That's why you seem so distant." Zarira nodded slowly, her eyes narrowing slightly. "The burden of leadership is heavy, and I have carried it for far too long. My people look to me for strength, but there is no one for me to turn to." Jackson's heart stirred. He had always seen her as an untouchable figure, a queen who ruled with absolute power. But now he saw something else entirely. She wasn't just a queen. She was a woman, struggling with isolation and responsibility, just like anyone else. Without thinking, he reached out, gently placing his hand on the table. "You don't have to do it alone, Your Majesty." Sarira's eyes flickered to his hand, then back to his face. There was a moment of silence before she spoke again. "I have spent my life building an empire, but it is empty without connection." Her voice softened, almost wistful. "I have watched as those around me used others for their own gain. But you—" She paused, her gaze growing intense again. "You are different. You have no ulterior motive. You are genuine." Jackson wasn't sure how to respond. He hadn't expected to hear such words from her. He had always seen himself as just a soldier, but here, in this moment, he realized that he had become something more to the Queen. Whether he liked it or not, he was starting to become a part of her world. But as much as he felt drawn to her, Jackson also knew that this connection was dangerous. Being close to Zarira meant entering a world of power struggles, enemies, and intrigue. There was no turning back now, no simple way to escape the path that had been set in motion. Zarira's next words confirmed that thought. "You may think you are just a human soldier, Lieutenant," she said softly, her gaze piercing into his, "but you have changed everything. For both of us." The tension in the palace was palpable. Every corner seemed to echo with whispers, and Jackson couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. The days after his conversation with Zarira had been strange. The Queen, despite her usual stoic demeanor, had been acting differently around him, more distant, yet with moments where her eyes would soften, as if she was struggling with something internal. It wasn't long before Jackson realized that their connection had not gone unnoticed. The palace was full of spies and informants, people who watched every move the royal family made. It didn't take long for whispers about the human soldier and the Queen's strange interest in him to reach the ears of her council. And when the Queen's inner circle took notice, things started to spiral quickly. One evening, Jackson was summoned to a private meeting in the palace's grand hall. As he walked down the long marble hallway, the echo of his footsteps seemed louder than usual. He entered the room to find Zarira seated at the head of a large circular table, flanked by her most trusted advisors. They all looked at him with unreadable expressions. "Lieutenant Jackson," Zarira began, her voice steady, though there was an edge to it. "The council has raised concerns about the closeness between us. They fear that your presence here may cause unrest." Jackson stood still, uncertain of what was happening. The room felt heavy with tension, and the Queen's cold gaze made it clear that this wasn't just a casual meeting. She was making a point, and Jackson was caught in the middle. "You understand, don't you?" Zarira continued, her eyes locked onto his. "My people are not used to weakness. They see affection as a vulnerability. They fear that I may be distracted by someone from outside my world." Jackson swallowed hard, realizing the gravity of the situation. It wasn't just his life at risk now. This had become a matter of politics, and the entire fate of the Queen's rule seemed to rest on his shoulders. "I never meant to cause trouble," Jackson said, his voice low. "I just saved your life. That's all." Zarira's eyes softened for a moment, but then she turned to face her council, her voice becoming commanding. "That may be true, Lieutenant, but it is not how my people see it. They do not understand why I have allowed a human, someone from a distant world, to grow so close to me." One of the council members, a tall, sharp-eyed Vasheri officer, spoke up. "Your Majesty, the presence of this human in the royal palace is a threat to the very foundation of our empire. His influence is growing, and soon it may be seen as favoritism." Jackson's heart raced. He knew that he couldn't just leave. He wasn't sure he could leave if he wanted to. But now, more than ever, he felt the weight of the Queen's position bearing down on him. His actions had set something in motion that couldn't be undone. "I didn't ask for any of this," Jackson said, feeling the frustration rise in his chest. "But I can't walk away now. Not after everything. I've seen what you're dealing with, Zarira. The queen looked at him, and for a moment, it was just the two of them. The council and the room seemed to fade into the background. She stood up, walking slowly around the table, until she was standing in front of him. "If I give you a position of power," Zarira said, her voice a whisper, "will you be able to handle it? Can you live with the consequences of my decisions?" Jackson didn't know what to say. He wasn't sure if he could handle the weight of what was being asked of him. But one thing was certain, there was no turning back now. "I'll do whatever it takes," Jackson said, his voice steady despite the storm of emotions inside him. "I'll stand by you." Zarira's eyes locked onto his, and for the first time, there was no doubt in either of them. He wasn't just a soldier anymore. He was a part of something much bigger, and whatever came next, they would face it together. The atmosphere in the palace had grown heavier with each passing day. Zarira, despite her usual composure, seemed distant, her thoughts occupied with the recent council meeting. Jackson could feel the weight of their shared decision hanging over them. What had started as a simple act of saving the queen's life had now escalated into something far more complicated. The queen's enemies were growing bolder, and their alliance was becoming harder to ignore. One evening, as Jackson stood in the royal gardens, Zarira approached him, her footsteps light on the stone path. She had called for him, and there was a seriousness in her voice that he couldn't ignore. "Lieutenant Jackson," Zarira began, her gaze steady and focused, "I have a mission for you, one that will test not just your skills, but your loyalty." Jackson's stomach tightened. He had known this moment was coming. She had made it clear that he was no longer just a soldier. He was part of her inner circle now, and with that came responsibility. He nodded, bracing himself for what would come next. "I'm ready," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. Zarira's eyes flickered with something almost like relief, but it was quickly replaced by the cold, calculating look she was known for. "You will travel to the border world of Drinos. It is a vital supply route for my people. But there are rebels there, radicals who threaten the stability of the region. You are to neutralize the threat and ensure that my control over the region remains unchallenged." Jackson felt his heart rate quicken. The task sounded simple in theory. Eliminate the rebels and secure the supply lines. But he knew that nothing was ever as simple as it seemed, especially not with the queen involved. This wasn't just about completing a mission. It was about proving his worth to Zarira, and to everyone else who was watching. "And if I fail?" Jackson asked, though he already knew the answer. Zarira didn't flinch. "Failure is not an option. If you succeed, you will be rewarded. If you fail, there will be consequences for both you and your people. But I have faith in you, Jackson." Her words sent a cold shiver down his spine. The queen's faith in him was something he hadn't expected, but it felt like a double-edged sword. Success could solidify his place in her world, but failure would have far-reaching consequences. The journey to Drinos was a long and perilous one. Jackson traveled with a small team of elite soldiers, each one trained for the dangers of the region. The planet itself was harsh, with rugged terrain and hostile environments. But it was the people, those who had turned against the queen, that posed the real threat. As Jackson and his team arrived at the rebel stronghold, he could feel the tension in the air. The rebels were more organized than he had anticipated, their tactics unpredictable. This wasn't just a fight for control, it was a fight for survival. The first skirmish was brutal. Jackson's team was ambushed as they approached the rebel camp. The battle was fast and chaotic, and Jackson had to rely on his instincts to survive. The sound of blasters echoed through the night as he led his men into the fray. In the chaos, Jackson found himself face to face with the leader of the rebels, a fierce woman who seemed as determined to win as he was to stop her. "You don't belong here, human," the rebel leader spat. "This world isn't yours to control." Jackson didn't respond. His focus was on the mission. With one swift movement, he disarmed her, taking control of the situation. The rebel leader, though defiant, realized she was defeated. As the dust settled, Jackson stood over the fallen leader, his breath heavy. He had done what was necessary, but the cost weighed heavily on him. He had successfully completed the mission, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed in him during the fight. He wasn't just fighting for survival anymore. He was fighting for a future, for something much larger than himself. When Jackson returned to the palace, Zarira greeted him with her usual poise. But as she looked at him, there was something different in her eyes, a quiet recognition of what he had just done. "You did well, Lieutenant," she said softly. "But remember, this is only the beginning. There will be more tests ahead, and each one will shape the future of my empire and yours." Jackson nodded, feeling the weight of her words. There was no going back now. He had crossed a line, and there was no turning back. Whatever came next, he would face it by her side. The days following Jackson's successful mission to Drinos were filled with a strange kind of quiet. Zarira's palace, always bustling with activity, seemed more somber than usual. Jackson couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted. The Queen's presence, once imposing and distant, now felt more personal. She had begun to rely on him more than ever, asking for his opinions in private meetings and seeking his counsel in matters of both politics and war. But Jackson wasn't sure if he was ready for this kind of attention. He had never wanted to be a part of the Vasheri royal court. He had only come to this planet to do his job, never imagining that it would lead to a place where his decisions could change the course of an entire empire, and certainly not that he would be the one to melt the heart of the Queen herself. One evening, as the golden light of the setting sun filtered through the palace windows, Zarira invited Jackson to dine with her in a private chamber. It was rare for her to share such a personal moment. Her dinners were usually held in the grand halls, attended by her closest advisors and courtiers. This was something different, and Jackson could feel the weight of it as soon as he entered the room. The table was set for two, a simple yet elegant affair. Zarira, as always, wore her regal attire, but there was a softness in her expression that Jackson had never seen before. Her usual mask of control had cracked, just a little, revealing something more vulnerable. She looked up as Jackson entered, her eyes meeting his with an intensity that made his heart beat faster. "Sit," she said softly, her voice lacking its usual command. There was a warmth in it that sent a shiver down Jackson's spine. "I wanted to thank you, Jackson, for everything." Jackson nodded, unsure of what to say. He had been on many missions, faced countless dangers. But this was different. Being here with Zarira felt like being caught in a moment suspended in time. He sat down, his mind racing with thoughts he didn't know how to express. "You have proven yourself," Zarira continued, her voice steady, but with a hint of something deeper. "Not just as a soldier, but as someone I can trust." She paused, watching him closely. "I have known many people in my life, Jackson, but I have never met anyone like you. You're different." The words caught Jackson off guard. He had always seen himself as just a regular guy, someone doing his job. But to the Queen, he was more than that. It felt strange, and yet, somehow, it also felt right. He had spent so much time focusing on the mission, on survival, that he hadn't realized how much he had come to care about her. "I don't know what to say," Jackson admitted, his voice quiet. "I never thought I'd be here, with you. I'm just a soldier. I'm not supposed to be part of this." Zarira's eyes softened as she leaned forward. "And yet here you are. Your actions have changed everything. Not just for my empire, but for me." Jackson looked at her, searching her face for any hint of a joke or a hint of her usual political games. But there was nothing but honesty there. Zarira, the powerful queen who had ruled for so long, was letting her guard down in front of him. "You've won my trust, Jackson," she said quietly, her voice sincere. "And you've earned my heart too." The words hit him like a thunderclap, unexpected but undeniable. He had never imagined this, never thought that someone like her, so powerful and distant, would ever allow herself to feel something for him. Yet, here they were, sitting together in a quiet room, sharing a moment that neither of them could undo. Zarira reached out, her hand brushing lightly against his. The touch was gentle, almost hesitant, but Jackson could feel the warmth radiating from her. It was a simple gesture, yet it carried so much weight. Zarira, Jackson began, but he didn't know how to finish the sentence. How could he? Everything about this situation was so far beyond what he had ever imagined. I know, she whispered, her hand still resting against his. I feel it too. In that moment, Jackson realized that there was no turning back. No matter how difficult or dangerous this path might be, he was already too far in. The heart of the Queen had been won, and now he was part of something far bigger than himself. The days following Jackson's quiet dinner with Zarira were filled with uncertainty. He knew that their bond had grown stronger, but he also knew that this newfound connection was dangerous. The Vasheri Council was not blind. They had seen the Queen's growing affection for him, and they were not pleased. As much as Jackson had come to care for Zarira, he knew that the political landscape around them was shifting. The council members, each with their own agendas and ambitions, were powerful figures in the empire. They were not about to let a human, a soldier with no noble blood, become so close to their queen. To them, Jackson was a threat, a dangerous distraction to the stability they had fought so hard to maintain. One morning, Jackson was summoned to the royal chamber once again. This time, it was not for a quiet dinner or private conversation. The heavy doors to the chamber creaked open, revealing Zarira, sitting at her throne, flanked by the members of her council. The room felt colder than usual, the tension thick in the air. Lieutenant Jackson. Zarira's voice rang out, calm and measured, but Jackson could hear the undercurrent of something more. You are requested to attend the council meeting. Jackson stepped forward, his heart pounding. He had been in meetings before, but this felt different. This wasn't about diplomacy or strategy. This was about his place in the Vasheri Empire, and more importantly, his place in Zarira's life. As he entered the chamber, all eyes turned to him. The council members, seated in their high-backed chairs, looked at him with a mixture of suspicion and disdain. They didn't trust him, and it was clear that they were waiting for Zarira to take control of the situation. One of the council members, an older Vasheri male with sharp eyes and a calculating smile, spoke first. Your Majesty, it is time for you to reconsider this relationship with the human. He is a liability. His presence here is weakening your rule, and it is threatening the stability of our empire. Jackson could feel the weight of the council's judgment pressing down on him. They were not just questioning him. They were questioning Zarira's decisions. They were testing her resolve. Zarira remained silent for a moment, her eyes hard and unblinking. I have made my decision, she said finally, her voice firm, and I will not be swayed by the council's fears. Jackson has proven himself more than capable. He is loyal to me, and that is all that matters. The council member, undeterred, pressed on. But Your Majesty, he is a human. He is not one of us. His loyalty means nothing in the face of the challenges we face. The Vasheri people will not accept him as a trusted advisor. If we allow this union to continue, we risk losing everything we have built. Jackson stood tall, his gaze fixed on Zarira. He could feel the pressure from the council, but he knew that he couldn't let them control this moment. He had earned his place by her side, and he wasn't about to back down now. I may be human, Jackson said, his voice steady, but I have shown time and again that I am loyal to Zarira. I will fight for her and for this empire, just as much as any Vasheri warrior would. If that's not enough, then I'm willing to prove it. Zarira's gaze softened, and for the briefest of moments, there was a flicker of pride in her eyes. But the council was not convinced. They muttered among themselves, exchanging glances that spoke volumes. We are not asking for a war, Your Majesty, another council member said. We are asking for you to make a choice between your people and this human. Zarira's expression hardened. She stood from her throne, her commanding presence filling the room. "I will not choose between Jackson and my people," she said, her voice ringing out with authority. "He is part of my future, and I will defend him, just as I will defend the Vasheri Empire. If you cannot accept that, then you will have to answer to me." The council members fell silent, their faces a mixture of surprise and grudging respect. Zarira had made her stand. The queen had chosen her path, and Jackson was a part of it. As the meeting came to a close, Jackson felt a sense of relief wash over him. He had stood up for Zarira, and she had stood up for him. But the battle was far from over. The council might have been silenced for now, but their dissatisfaction lingered, and there were still many challenges ahead. However, for the first time, Jackson felt that the queen's heart, and his place in her world, was no longer in doubt. The decision made in the council chamber had not been the end of Jackson's struggles, but the beginning of a new, more dangerous chapter. Zarira's declaration to the council had been bold and clear, but it had also made them her enemies. Even though they had backed down for the moment, Jackson knew it would only be a matter of time before they would test her resolve again. In the days that followed, the palace became a place of constant tension. Whispers of rebellion spread through the corridors, not just from outside, but within the very walls of the Vasheri Empire. There were factions who viewed Zarira's decisions as a threat to their own power, and they were waiting for the right moment to strike. Zarira, ever the strategist, had expected this. She had spent her life building an empire, but now, for the first time, she felt truly vulnerable. It was no longer just her people's loyalty she had to secure, it was her position, and Jackson had become a symbol of that vulnerability. One evening, as they sat together in Zarira's private quarters, Jackson could see the weight of the world on her shoulders. The room was lit only by the soft glow of distant stars, and the silence between them felt heavy, as if both of them were holding their breath. Zarira looked at him, her gaze steady. "Jackson," she began, her voice softer than usual, "you have become more than just an ally to me. You have become someone I cannot lose, and I need you to understand that this—" She paused, looking out the window. "This is only the beginning. The dangers we face now are unlike anything we faced before." Jackson nodded, feeling the gravity of her words. "I understand. But we're in this together. I'm not going anywhere." Her eyes met his, and for a moment, the weight of her past and her present seemed to collide. "There are forces within my empire who will not accept this alliance. They will fight to tear us apart. And there are enemies beyond our borders who will see our weakness and try to exploit it." Jackson could feel the tension building in the room. The threat was not just internal, it was everywhere. They were surrounded by enemies, both near and far, and their survival depended on the fragile trust that existed between them. But there was something in Zarira's eyes now, something more than fear. It was determination. "I've made arrangements," Zarira continued. "There's an ally, someone who can help us, a powerful faction who has long been an enemy of my rivals. They are willing to support us, but the price is high." Jackson raised an eyebrow. "What's the price?" Zarira hesitated for a moment before speaking. "They want a formal alliance, an arranged marriage between me and our leader. It's the only way they will offer their full support." The words hung in the air like a weight that neither of them wanted to acknowledge. Jackson's heart skipped a beat. An arranged marriage. Was this what Zarira had been talking about? Was this the kind of price she was willing to pay to secure her future? "You don't have to do this," Jackson said quickly, his voice filled with concern. "There has to be another way." Zarira shook her head. "There is no other way. The alliance is crucial to our survival. But I will not do this alone. I want you by my side, Jackson. I need you, more than you know." Jackson felt a wave of emotions wash over him. This was more than just a political decision. It was a personal one for Zarira. She was willing to sacrifice her own autonomy to protect the empire and the future they had started to build together. And yet she was asking him to stand with her, to be part of the dangerous game that was unfolding. "I'll stand by you," he said without hesitation. "Whatever it takes." Zarira's eyes softened, and for the first time in days, she allowed herself to relax. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible. In that moment, Jackson knew that there was no going back. They had crossed a line, and the path ahead would only become more dangerous. But he was willing to face it, not just for the Empire or for the Queen, but for her, because, despite everything, he had come to care for her more deeply than he could have imagined. Together, they were about to make an alliance that would change the course of their future, and the future of the Vasheri Empire. The weeks that followed were filled with tension. Jackson had never imagined that he would be part of such a complex, dangerous world. The decision Zarira had made, to enter into an alliance with a rival faction by agreeing to an arranged marriage, had set the stage for a new chapter in their lives. But with every step they took toward that future, the risks grew larger. Zarira, despite her calm exterior, seemed more worn than usual. The weight of leadership was heavy on her shoulders, and Jackson could see that she was carrying it alone, even though she had him by her side. Every decision she made, every word she spoke, seemed to be under constant scrutiny by her enemies. The council had not stopped its whispers, and new threats emerged daily. The arranged marriage was not just a political move. It was a declaration of war to those who sought to destroy her. One evening, after a particularly exhausting day of strategizing with her allies, Zarira met with Jackson in the palace gardens. The stars above shone brightly, but there was a chill in the air. It was a reminder that, no matter how powerful they were not safe. Jackson found her standing by the edge of the fountain, her back to him, as though she was trying to hide the worry that had settled into her features. He stepped closer, his footsteps soft on the stone path. "Zarira," he said gently, his voice breaking the silence between them. She turned to face him, her expression unreadable. "Jackson," she whispered, her gaze softening when she saw him. "I've been thinking about everything. About what's to come. About the marriage." Jackson could see the internal struggle in her eyes. He knew how difficult this choice was for her. This wasn't just about power or politics. It was about her heart. The Queen, who had always been strong and unyielding, was now vulnerable in a way he had never expected. "You don't have to do this," Jackson said, his voice firm. "There has to be another way. We can find a solution that doesn't require you to sacrifice everything." Zarira looked down for a moment, as if considering his words. Then she slowly shook her head. "There is no other way, Jackson. I've built this empire for so long, but the time has come to secure its future. The marriage will bring stability. It will give us the strength to fight off our enemies and protect the people I've sworn to serve." Jackson took a step closer, his heart heavy with the thought of what she was about to do. "But what about you? What do you want? You've always carried the weight of the world on your shoulders, but you don't have to carry it alone anymore." Zarira met his gaze, and for the first time, Jackson saw the fear in her eyes. The fear of losing herself, of becoming a mere pawn in a game she couldn't control. "I have to do what's necessary," she said quietly. "But that doesn't mean I'm not afraid. I've been alone for so long, Jackson. I don't know if I can trust anyone with my heart, but I trust you." Her words struck him deeply, and for a moment, Jackson didn't know what to say. He had never imagined that the Queen, who had ruled with such authority, would ever let anyone close enough to see her vulnerability. "I trust you too," he said softly, "and I'll stand by you, whatever happens." Zarira's eyes glistened with emotion, though she quickly composed herself. "There's no turning back now. The alliance will be sealed, and my future will be tied to this marriage. But I won't let go of what we have, Jackson. I can't." Jackson reached out, taking her hand in his. It was a simple gesture, but it felt like a promise. "I'm not asking you to let go. I'm here for you. Always." The weight of their decisions hung between them, but in that moment, they both knew what had to be done. The future was uncertain, and the challenges they faced were vast. But they had each other, and that would be enough. For now. As they stood there in the quiet of the night, Jackson realized that, no matter what came next, he had already chosen his path. His fate was intertwined with Zarira's, and together, they would face whatever the future held. Jackson stood at the edge of the Vasheri Palace, watching as the sky shifted from dusk to night. The stars above twinkled brightly, as if the universe itself was holding its breath. It was a day that would change everything, not just for him, but for Zarira and the entire Vasheri Empire. The arranged marriage, the political alliance that had been the source of so much tension, was about to be sealed. As he gazed out into the distance, Jackson couldn't help but feel a wave of uncertainty. He had fought wars, faced danger, and made difficult decisions, but this was different. This wasn't just about survival. This was about their future, their hearts, and the fragile bond they had built. Zarira had kept her distance in the last few days, caught up in the final arrangements. She was the queen, after all, and her duty came first. But Jackson knew that the weight of this decision was bearing down on her more than anyone realized. She had made it clear that she would go through with the marriage for the good of her empire, but the thought of it still troubled her. The queen, who had once ruled with cold precision, had shown him a side of herself that was filled with doubt and fear. As the sun set, Jackson made his way to the royal hall, where the ceremony was to take place. The grand room was filled with dignitaries, allies, and members of the Vasheri Council. The air was thick with expectation, but there was also an underlying tension. Jackson couldn't ignore the uneasy feeling in his chest. When he entered the hall, his eyes immediately found Zarira. She stood at the front, regal as ever, her eyes fixed on the ground. She wore the ceremonial robes of the Vasheri queen, a stunning mixture of dark colors and intricate designs that spoke of her power and status. But beneath her imposing exterior, Jackson could see the uncertainty in her posture, the way her shoulders were tense, the way her fingers trembled ever so slightly. He approached her quietly, standing by her side. For a moment, they simply stood together, no words needed between them. There was a quiet understanding in the air, a shared knowledge that everything they had worked for, everything they had sacrificed, was coming to a head. "Are you ready?" Jackson asked softly, his voice steady. Zarira turned to him, her eyes locking onto his. For the first time, there was no mask, no facade of power. She was simply a woman, standing at the crossroads of her destiny. "I don't know," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I know that this is the only way." Jackson nodded, understanding her words all too well. The future was uncertain, and the price they were paying was high. But they were in this together, and whatever happened next, they would face it side by side. The ceremony began, and the room fell into a tense silence. The leader of the rival faction, the one who had agreed to the alliance, stood before them, his eyes cold but calculating. The vows were spoken, the alliances sealed, and the weight of the moment hung heavily in the air. As the final words were spoken, Jackson felt the ground shift beneath him. The marriage, the alliance, it was done. But the real test was just beginning. Zarira turned to him, her eyes searching his. "There's no turning back now." Jackson took her hand, his grip firm and sure. "There never was," he replied. Together, they faced the future, knowing that their bond, forged in the fires of uncertainty, would be their strength. No matter what challenges lay ahead, they would face them as one. And so, with the ceremony complete, a new chapter began for both of them. A chapter filled with risks, sacrifices, and the unknown. But as long as they stood together, there was no force in the universe that could tear them apart.